everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It is me. It is Nate. It's mid-February. Nate, how are things on your side of that pond? Has everything fallen into disrepair? Has Brexit broken everybody's brain? Well, I mean, everybody's brain was already broken by Brexit, but...
I mean, most certainly. Also, we just had a really big winter storm pass through. The winds were so intense that planes that were flying between the East Coast of the United States and the United Kingdom were breaking records for subsonic flight. Because with that strong of a tailwind, the normal flight time of about 6 hours ish to fly from New York City to London, there was one flight that got so much of a tailwind they got to London in 4 hours and 47 minutes. So needless to say, the wind's been insane. We didn't really get as bad. There's some places in other parts of the country that have been getting flooding, but we definitely got rain and wind yesterday, and it was nuts. So extremely grim midwinter, I suppose. It's like winter storms in America. You typically assume there's going to be a lot of snow, but we don't really get snow that much here. Instead, we just get a lot of stuff that makes you not want to go outside.
So everybody's complaining about global warming, and yet now we're saving airplane fuel with some global warming. Though I guess if you had to fly,
if you were flying back,
yeah.
then it was taking what was supposed to be a 7-hour flight or 6. I can't remember which is shorter, which is faster. You basically got the shitty end of that.
You just keep going the other direction. Just everybody flies in one direction
just
around.
Fly around the goddamn world. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just everybody's going west to east all times, no matter what. You want to go to Kansas City? Sorry, it's going to take you 12 hours.
That was kind of the joke for me when we deployed, was because I was stationed in Alaska. So when you get down to it, the flight you're already halfway to Asia. But I don't know what the deal was. I never got a proper justification. I couldn't really ask for one as a lieutenant, and nobody could. But more or less, we couldn't fly military flights over Chinese or Russian airspace, even though they were contracted civilian passenger jets. Because obviously they're full of American military, and if something goes wrong and you have to land somewhere, there's a bunch of uniformed military with weapons. It looks weird. So instead of flying from Alaska to Kyrgyzstan, which I think would be like an 8 or a 10-hour flight, we flew when I deployed to combat, we flew from Alaska to Scotland to Germany to Kyrgyzstan, and then on the way back we flew Kyrgyzstan to Germany to Newfoundland to Illinois to Alaska. So we legitimately did what you were describing of flying the opposite way around the world.
You'd think you'd just go up north, go over the North Pole. But I suppose if you had to land, for emergency purposes.
I mean, obviously, like, it's kind of weird. I'm not 100% sure what the flight path is, but I reckon, I mean, obviously there is a way that you can fly from Germany to Kyrgyzstan without going over Russia. And obviously not going over China either. And that's the route they took. So such is life. I mean, I seem to recall them having done a different rail transport system to bring non-sensitive items to Afghanistan via rail cars through Russia. They had gotten that agreed, as opposed to the old way, which was putting them, to the port of Karachi and then putting them on trucks to Afghanistan. But who even knows? Because, I mean, when you think about it, like, though the big turn for the worse in U.S.-Russia relations didn't happen until after 2012. I mean, I was in Afghanistan in 2009, 2010, so I'm not sure, but it's weird to think like, at one point we had negotiated some kind of agreement to where we're at now, where Russia's going to decide the election for you or some shit.
I would just how shitty would it be if your sea bag was on a rail car in Russia and was just scattered across the Siberian desert just from a derailing, just well, I mean, it's in Russia, so I guess we're gonna all go fuck ourselves. Also, sign this flipple.
How would that be any different though than when you put your stuff in you send it to Afghanistan, then you open they all the container seals are still on, and then you open up the container and discover they've cut out the bottom of the container and replaced it with bricks and sandbags and just welded a new bottom on the bottom of the container.
I'm sorry, did that happen?
That legitimately happened. Yes.
What?
Oh my god, dude, the stuff that got pilfered between Pakistan and Afghanistan was insane. I mean, I remember as HHCXO receiving a bunch of vehicles being dropped off by a convoy to our our cargo receiving yard, and there were a bunch of construction vehicles like bulldozers and backhoes and stuff, military vehicles, and 3 or 4 of them were just burned to a crisp because they've been hit with a fucking RPG. Absolutely, people found containers that had been pilfered. Like either they just cut the locks, cut the seals, and stolen everything, or they had left them, untouched on the front of the container, but they had cut out the bottom of the container and stolen everything. I mean, 100%, dude. That stuff happened all the time. Anybody who worked logistics,
who did that?
People in Pakistan, or people in Afghanistan.
I mean, that makes sense. I was going to say, if soldiers are stealing that shit, that
I mean, that's hilarious, but I just don't know what the fuck they would do with it. If soldiers steal stuff, it's more like using open line items to and commanders' discretionary funds to order 100 TVs. I don't think cutting open a shipping container is really their style. But the thing that got me about that was, I mean, yeah, logistically speaking, when you talk about getting stuff to Afghanistan, I mean, it's hard for people to understand the sheer volume of stuff that comes over, and also how many containers, how big containers are, how much space on a plane it takes up to move stuff that heavy, how little you can fit in the biggest of cargo jets, like the C-5 Galaxy, how little cargo you can actually fit in those relative to on a container ship or even on a truck convoy, and why it was so much easier to get stuff in Iraq than in Afghanistan. It's like in Iraq, literally a place that used to be a province of Iraq was cut off and formed into, the state of Kuwait. And you can bring huge container ships to the port of Kuwait and unload them and then put them on a convoy or whatever up to Iraq, as opposed to Afghanistan, where it's, hundreds and hundreds, I think if not thousands of miles. I'm not sure how long, I mean, the road journey from Karachi to, Bagram or onward might be 300 or 400 miles straight line distance, but it's much further when you think about how much of a winding road you have to take.
Yeah, there's no freeway there. There's no direct rail car from Karachi into Bagram.
I mean, I remember my battalion, I was in charge of doing the Strat Air loadout, which is strategic airlift stuff. So things that were too sensitive to be shipped, or in our case, they'd missed the deadline for shipping them in containers and then on boats, and then realized that they couldn't leave this stuff as left behind equipment. And I think every company got, if I'm not mistaken, headquarters company got 2 Tricons. So containers of a size that you could, if you put 3 of them together, they made the size of a normal 20-foot unit. And every other company, either, if I remember correctly, they either got a single Tricon or they had to split a Tricon. A and D co got half a Tricon each, and B and C co got half a Tricon each. But that was, for a whole battalion, that was what we were allotted to load up on a plane that was then going to fly to Bagram, and then we'd be in country right away. So, needless to say, you didn't get a lot. Stuff that had to go by air, you did not get a lot. And yeah, it was just logistic nightmare. It's just one of those things that you start us talking on this shit and it starts spinning out, because so much of this whole story is just a decade's worth of acquiring subject matter expertise on a really dysfunctional situation. And I feel like that is a pretty neat way to then discuss what's going on with the whole Colonel Vindman case right now, in terms of a lot of military lawyers and people are weighing in on a situation that's just autocrat, hilarious level of corruption. But Francis, you found some news stories about this situation.
Yeah, so Colonel Vindman was called in as a witness during the Trump impeachment, and Vindman worked in the White House in security of some kind. So, if you haven't been paying attention, Vindman was, Trump was acquitted, and Vindman was suddenly, ousted from being in the White House. Escorted out, told his services were no longer needed. He has a brother who's also a lieutenant colonel who apparently got fired from his job too. And so, there's been the last couple of months leading up to the impeachment trial, and then where we're at now has been very there's been a lot of really dumb political cartoons about Vindman saluting the flag while Republicans salute a flag with Donald Trump on it and shit like that. But Vindman got canned. Unsurprising. There's nothing so there's not supposed to be retaliation against witnesses and whistleblowers, and I believe that Mark Esper, isn't he the SecDef?
Secretary of Defense?
Yeah, the acting SecDef was just no, there's not going to be any retaliation. And then immediately there's retaliation. Although, like, he just got shuffled away from a job. Like, I don't know if this really counts as retaliation, but also I'm only a barracks lawyer, so I don't really fucking know. Like, I would say that if I was working in the White House and I was called as a material witness against the commander in chief, I would be running for another job myself, regardless of, if he got acquitted. No, I'd be trying to find myself another assignment. So maybe it's a blessing that Vindman got to go somewhere else. But we're not really here to discuss one way or the other, because we got some vet bro shit to go over, because that's what this podcast is about. It's not about the nuances of the legal system and uniform code of military justice. It's about dipshit chuds on Fox and Friends. So you've got Leroy Petry, who's a Medal of Honor recipient, who went on Fox and Friends on February 9th and decided to start shit talking Vindman in just the most petulant, petty ways. Here's the thing. I think a lot of folks that know, or I think a lot of the folks that I know, when this all started, those that knew him when he was going through Ranger School, this is Vindman going through Ranger School, that he was a chow hall thief in the Ranger School and couldn't be trusted. And they tried peering him out. And they said, well, I guess it hasn't changed much. And usually folks that tried to make a big a statue of something that we call spotlighters in the military, trying to highlight themselves as heroes or doing something great. And you could do something great just doing your job. Now, I want to point out that Petry is discussing this guy as somebody who wants the spotlight and who stole food out of the chow hall, which, sorry, if you weren't stealing food out of the chow hall, were you actually in the fucking military ever? I know you were in Ranger School, so we'll get to the chow hall Ranger thing in a minute. But, like, this dude is wearing a ratty Warriors Call hat on TV, wearing a hat inside on TV, and his literal Medal of Honor around his fucking neck, and wanting to talk about a guy who is being a spotlighter, I guess. And I gotta say, there's only one at the moment. There's only one like really good Medal of Honor winner, and that's Dakota Meyer, who doesn't go on Fox and Friends and says stupid shit. Because it seems like all the other living ones go on Fox and Friends and says stupid shit constantly, rather than being like, wow, it's an honor, but also, we missed, I lost a lot of good friends out there. So Nate, as our resident special forces infantry ranger guy, what I mean, let's talk, a chow hall ranger. Does this actually exist? Because most of the rangers I know were generally up their own asses at any given time too. Like rangers, like an army ranger in the hierarchy of special forces, right? Like, if you really want to do career advancement, Ranger School is one of them. You can go drill sergeant, you can do recruiting, or you go Ranger. And the Ranger tab is really put it on, and it looks really good, and it looks good on your records briefing and everything. But like, it is basically infantry plus. Like, you got your infantry, and then you go Ranger School, and then you're like double infantry, but you're not necessarily special forces yet. You're not Green Beret, you're not SEAL or anything. It's really like that.
We got to make this distinction that I think we've made before on the show, but it's good to clarify that the Ranger Regiment, the 75th Ranger Regiment, it falls under the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. It is a special operations unit. But you're not in Ranger Regiment just because you graduated from Ranger School. Now, if you want any leadership position in Ranger Regiment, if you are in Ranger Regiment, or you want to go to Ranger Regiment as an NCO or an officer, you have to graduate from Ranger School. But the school is different than the unit itself. And so I don't believe that Vindman was ever in Ranger Regiment. But if he graduated from Ranger School, what it sounds like is Petry is trying to basically cast aspersions on the fact that this guy has a tab by saying he was a chow thief. Now, if people found out you were a chow thief and tried to peer you at, like, I'm just saying, as somebody who went through Ranger School, who, I mean, it was I had a rough time. I got hurt in Ranger School, and like, it's no fun being hurt. I made it straight through without recycling, but like I would be embarrassed if my character was judged on my performance in Ranger School, because to be quite frankly, it's really hard when it's cold and wet and dark and you're hurt and it sucks and like you aren't necessarily performing at your best self. But if people confirmed that you'd stolen chow, like you'd get peered out, and like the next opportunity, like that would stick in people's minds so much. There's so basically in Ranger School, even if you've passed your patrol and you have the requisite number of passes or whatever, like you have a certain percentage, I can't remember what it is, of like you can't have more than this many no-goes on your patrols to graduate. At the end of each phase, you get assessed in your peer evaluations, and if you're sucking and people don't like you, you can get peered out. And that's no good. That you aren't automatically recycled if you get peered out the first time. You get moved to a new unit, or like a new company or a new platoon. But if you get peered out twice, then you absolutely recycle a phase. And as I understand it, if you peer out a third time without having a successive period where you've passed, then you typically either day one recycle or you get dropped from school. Ranger School is 62 days normally, unless you go to the one I went to where you have block leave in between a phase. So it's a long course. You have a lot of time. You spend a lot of time around people. And so what it sounds like, this guy, Petry, who from his lapel pin and stuff looks as though he was a Ranger Regiment veteran as well as graduating from Ranger School, is trying to spread this rumor that Colonel Vindman was a shithead in Ranger School and everyone knew it, but they couldn't peer him out, and that he's now a Spotlight Ranger. And a Spotlight Ranger being like a person who's a shitbag, but then when people are watching is performing, like, you know, making a big show of being, you know, in charge and squared away and stuff like that. And I mean, obviously, like, those are negative stereotypes in the military of a person who's, and maybe we should specify that, you know, you have the idea of the Spotlight Ranger, which is somebody who only does their job well when being seen by people who might have some influence over, you know, their prospects or their future. You have the Blue Falcon, which is somebody who fucks people over, whether by being, not necessarily by being lazy or disorganized, but rather just like in a situation in which they stand to gain or they stand to be inconvenienced by something. If they share the burden, they wind up just inconveniencing everybody else. It's a weird kind of taxonomy, the difference between Spotlight Ranger and Blue Falcon. Blue Falcon being the joke that it's sort of BF would also be an acronym for buddy fucker, hence the term. What's weird to me is the idea that a guy's going to go on national TV and try to drag up a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army's history in Ranger School when they weren't in the same Ranger class, right. and they probably never served together. And if this guy is a lieutenant colonel, he probably went to Ranger School 15, 17 years ago.
Right, so, like, I mean, sometime in the 90s, maybe.
I don't know about the 90s, but
late
I mean,
90s, like, early 2000s.
I graduated from Ranger School in January of 2008, and my friends who were still in are all majors. One of my friends from undergrad, who was 2 years ahead of me in the ROTC program, just pinned lieutenant colonel. Like, that's how long ago we're talking. We're talking about people who went to Ranger School in 04, 05, 06. So, I mean, maybe there's on some fucking This Ain't Hell forum or some shit like that, there's some folks who know me because of this podcast and are talking about how much I sucked in Ranger School. And I mean, they're probably right. Like, it was hard. I mean, I passed straight through, but it was fucking hard. And I mean, and everybody has a bad day. Everybody has a bad week. Everybody gets their heart broken at some point in Ranger School. So in a way, it's just a very, very weird thing because it's a spectacularly niche kind of insult to levy on somebody. It's it draws on a concept that would be very hard for people to understand. Because I mean, quite frankly, if you robbed an MRE box and you, I mean, you would be so beneath contempt as somebody who stole food from somebody else or who stole food and didn't share it in Ranger School that you would be peered out in an instant, or they would just dime you out to the fucking RIs. But if you found food or you found an unsecured MRE box or something and you stole food and you gave it to the rest of your squad and you kept it secret, that or the rest of your platoon, that would be like that would be the opposite of being a chow thief. Like you'd be a hero for that. I mean, if you steal food to help your squad or your platoon, that's good as hell, as long as you're not fucking over another unit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, and they made it sound like, you know, And I know there's a difference between like the chow thief, which you're talking about, like somebody who steals food from other people, versus somebody who is snatching food out of the chow hall itself, which doesn't steal from anybody. But
One of the things
yeah,
they do in Ranger School is they're constantly exerting control over you by determining when you can and cannot eat and what you can eat and stuff like that. You know, they might decide to be dicks and be like, "Oh, well, you guys are laughing or something, and so your chow time is over now. Throw all your MREs away, even if you've only eaten like a single thing of like you've had a single pack of crackers, and that might be your only food for the next 12 to 18 hours." So people are always like, yeah, they'll make a show of it, but like squirrel food away and hide out. I mean, I remember getting we all got, I think, either major minuses or minor minuses, which were demerits in Ranger School because they told us to throw our food away and we stole some candy and we all shared it. Like, we all got caught in a circle sharing candy really quickly because fuck the RIs. And the RIs show up and they're all these out of shape ass dudes and you're just like, you're massively underweight from being starved in this horrible school. And it breeds this utter contempt for them. And so it's just such a weird dynamic. I don't know. I mean, like I'm
surprised
not
I'm surprised Ranger School doesn't radicalize more people to be like, who the fuck these authority figures?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's one of those things where it could, but then it winds up becoming this big. It's in the same way that if you experience the conditions that you experience in Ranger School in the military, where it wasn't like a voluntary thing that you had a big like pride reward at the end, I genuinely think more people would have serious, emotional injuries effectively from having experienced it because it's just so incredibly unpleasant. But yeah, you'd think that it would make people a little bit less bootlicky, but I mean, it's weird how I think that the big difference in that is that people then turn around. Like, one of the other byproducts of a thing like that is that it breeds incredible contempt for anybody who's weak. And so on one hand, you could radicalize people against authority from seeing like the level of shittiness with which they get treated in a school like that. But then also, I think one of the byproducts of things like that is this idea that nobody who can't give 100% all the time belongs, and thus it becomes kind of like also fast radicalization in a way. Which is not to say that everybody who goes to Ranger School comes out of that, but I think it's there's a really intense sink or swim mentality that you wind up having to have, and that I think impacts how people look at things, and it's not particularly useful for leadership because, I mean, yes, sure, if all you're ever doing is commanding units of like in shape 19-year-olds, then great, you can be a dick, like you're like act like an RI, but that's not the army. That's not real life,
So another thing that I know is Pete Hegseth here, one of the hosts. He's translating the Chow Hall Thief and Spotlight Ranger, and then he says, I've also heard his political allegiance. He always wore it openly. Like, we're all allowed to have political views, but he's been a left-winger his entire career, and now the president has a prerogative to get rid of him. I'm fucking sorry. Did somebody in the military fucking openly be political in some way? Because, and then you're just like, oh, well, that's wild. Like, absolutely every dipshit conservative in the military is a loudmouth dipshit conservative, but we're just gonna go ahead and dime this guy out, I guess. It's I mean, it's the same. It's that same vet. Like, we're all supposed to be, brothers in arms, right? And like, obviously, you and I have different mentalities on that, but like, I would never in a million years. Like, I hate the military, but I would never, fuck over anybody on this fucking level, especially not to Fox and Friends, especially a person I literally do not know. To just be like, oh, I heard these stories about him from when he went to Ranger School like a fucking decade before me. Anyway, I have a medal from, killing a lot of people, so you guys should listen to me, and also we're gonna like. First off, a left winger doesn't mean anything to Fox. And
yeah,
Friends.
A left winger in the opinion of a fascist is literally anybody who doesn't agree with the fascist. I mean, right. Come on. Also, like, the idea that a lieutenant colonel in the army is an open left winger. I mean, I've met a few people who are really openly a left wing in the military, but they're very rare. And quite frankly, the ones who I have met were mostly reservists. In the sense that they spent more time with regular people than they did with fucking, the rest of us idiots, window licking ass jarheads. And so it's just a lot easier. I mean, I've met lots of, also similarly, the most like full on, John Birch Society, insane conservatives that I met were National Guard or reservists as well. But to me, it's really strange because this has just been another example of how there really is no such thing as this sort of like veterans are above politics. And I find it very weird how you can see in this current moment two very different ways of how one politicizes military service. Look at what Pete Hegseth and this Petry guy, how they're using legitimately the highest award for valor that a person can receive in the U.S. military as a justification to bring a guy on TV so he can shit on their political enemy,
Well,
and versus the Democrats looking at like Pete Buttigieg and saying, well, we'll see, this is why everybody has to eat their peas and say their prayers and brush their teeth. And by the way, like we need to have national service for teens. And they think that this whole like above it all appeal to the fucking hall monitors is going to fly, when it's like the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to get guys like this to come on and be like, no, I saw Mayor Butt stealing food from the chow hall. Like, do you think they're not going to like John Kerry was an actual war hero and they did this to him? It takes 2 minutes of fucking examining Pete Buttigieg's record to be like, this guy is just a fucking resume burnisher, like with a bullshit job and a lot of cool guy photos that anybody can examine and be like, this just doesn't add up. Like, it's such a dumb fake veneer, and you honestly think they're not, if they're doing this to a guy who's a career officer who happened to be in the wrong place in the wrong time politically, in the sense that like because he's a native Ukrainian speaker and Russian speaker and was involved in the US military's liaison stuff with Ukraine, was up close and personal with like the insane corruption and just nonsense that Donald Trump was trying to do. If they go after him by bringing on, like fucking Medal of Honor recipient Neck Tats Joe, do you think that they're not going to do something even worse to like as much of a fucking simp nerd as Pete Buttigieg?
Now, we also have another opinion from the opposite end of the spectrum of a Medal of Honor winner, Mike Cernovich, our resident out of the military as a second lieutenant. You know that Mr. Vindman couldn't pass a PT test. As commander-in-chief, real Donald Trump has the power to order Vindman's chain of command to issue a spot PT test. Retweet if you want to see Mr. Vindman take a PT test. Now, Cernovich is one of my favorite people online because he is so batshit insane. Like, but the thing is he has no real power other than over other crazy people, and he's the guy who we have talked about him before, who got out of the army as a second lieutenant because somehow, some way, he managed to not go to officer basic course, which is, I think he said that there were no classes available when he needed it, which is an insane lie, just like an incredible lie. But that's fine. But spot PT tests, man. Do you want to kill 30% of the reserves? Like, and also a spot PT test doesn't fucking mean anything. He could have a profile. He could pass. He could fail PT tests and get to take another one in 6 months. So you just the political point scoring against Vindman, and also Cernovich is being very purposeful, calling him Mr. Vindman and not Lieutenant Colonel. As we saw, the president put Lieutenant Colonel in quotes. So yeah, guys in the military, like, if this hasn't been a wake-up call to you that you not towing the line 100% with the president literally puts your career in danger, like, probably not because you're not like working at the White House, you're not directly under him or anything, but like, guess what? When the military, like, and when I say purges, I don't mean like you're gonna go get shot in a ditch or something. But when it comes to if we ever got to a point of we need to start forcing people who are not loyal to the party out of the military, y'all are on the fucking chopping block. I know the commander-in-chief. I know my boss hates me, or would hate me if he knew I existed. I know that if it doesn't matter, my NCOERs, my peer reviews, my commander saying that I'm great, it doesn't matter because I'm a socialist and I'm and I think war is dumb and we shouldn't fucking do it. And I think that the president has a brain that is slowly leaking into his ass. So it's a scare. It's not really a scary time to be in the military, other than deployments and readiness and shit like that, and the fact that like
But it is a very deeply stupid time to be in the military.
yes, and it is an incredibly disturbed time to be in the military, and like to like it's like on that level where everybody's like I remember the radicalization of my father, where he's just like, well, we've got to respect the office of the presidency, and then like a month later he's just like, the presidency is bullshit. All of this is bullshit. What the fuck are we doing? And like that whole like, okay, so we've in the last 3 years we've learned the office of the presidency doesn't matter. We've learned that the Constitution doesn't really matter. We've learned that as long as you control 2/3 of the government, you can just do whatever the fuck you want, and laws don't matter. So when you're in the military and you raise your hand to defend, to pledge to defend the Constitution, does anybody still have a just like, oh God, this is I gotta still stand up in front of the Constitution put us in this fucking debacle. Like, the reason why things are shit is because of the Constitution. So stop defending it so hard, with your lives and your minds and your words, because it ain't there to defend you. And I think that that's the most frightening and telling part of it, is that the Constitution does not stand up for me in any way, shape, or form, because anybody can just pencil whip an order or something and say, nope, we're going to interpret it this way, and Sergeant Horton can go fuck himself. So yeah, get out of the fucking army, even if Bernie Sanders gets in there, because we've learned that it doesn't matter who, like, the office of the presidency only survives based on like how decent of a human being we elect president. And I'm gonna go ahead and guarantee you that after Trump, we're just gonna find somebody else even more insane. Like, it's not going to be Trump, but they're going to find somebody who is going to be somehow even, still along that same Trumpian charisma. You're not going to find that full charisma, but you're going to find a Scott Walker or Josh Hawley, who is an insane evangelical and hates brown people and is ready to take up the mantle of the office of the presidency and continue the legacy of just absolute shit. And a presidency doesn't matter, because in 4 years or 8 years you elect them out and elect somebody else in, and the next person can change all the rules again. So fuck all of this. This is if this is not the wake up call that you need if you're in the military, and the fact that not only has the president just completely turned this guy out, but like your own fellow soldiers will turn you out and will just make shit up and be like, I heard a rumor that you were a shithead fucking 17 years ago. Shit, I was a shithead 17 years ago. I'm slightly less of a shithead now. So if this is not your wake up call, I don't know what is going to be your wake up call, but you need to start moving towards the exit of the military yourself, or you need to start radicalizing your peers. I don't know which one it's going to be, whichever one you feel more comfortable with, but you are not safe as a not insane conservative as in the military. And that's all I got on that.
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely think that we are witnessing what I might describe as the refutation of this idea that we've talked about a bunch on this show, that you didn't have to worry as an individual because the institutions would protect you. And what I think we're coming to realize is that the American Constitution is a piece of dog shit, and American governance is actually quite unstable and dysfunctional, and it's only going to get worse. And I think the big takeaway, I agree with what you said, Francis, is that if you don't have a significant engagement as far as like a Bernie Sanders presidency and the mobilization of people into not just electoralism, but also, social political organization at home in their communities, et cetera, to be dialed into stuff and respond to things beyond just, every 2 years when there's a federal election. What's going to happen is that you're going to see dysfunction and hysteria blocking every aspect of progress. And when the Republicans regroup, they're just going to get a Tom Cotton who now knows that he can be as fash and as undemocratic as he wants, and he just won't be as vulgar as Trump. And to be honest with you, a lot of liberals will be okay with that, because even though they might be like, oh, I mourn for our country's soul, they know that their economic and social position won't really change that much. Whereas under somebody who wants to change the relationship that American workers have with capital, you absolutely are going to see a change in your social and economic position if you're rich, if you're a rich liberal. Maybe that change will just be your slightly higher rate, marginal tax rate, but doesn't matter. People are going to, these people are going to go into hysterics about it. That's why they like people like Pete Buttigieg, because it's just sort of the Obama mythos. They can say, look at all these high-minded principles I believe in, when the person actually gets into office and starts trying to enact Republican policy proposals from the 90s and still gets called a fucking Marxist and a Stalinist by, the insane frothing at the mouth, blowing diarrhea on myself to own the libs Fox News audience. It doesn't matter. I think that there's an extent to which people need to realize that institutions aren't going to protect you. And American governance, American political stability is a complete misnomer. It's actually, the institutions in America are quite moribund, and they're only getting worse. And you're going to see a lot of things that you didn't think possible, because in a way, I guess to use the expression, the cat is kind of out of the bag. Trump has revealed that none of it matters. Literally nothing matters. There is no way to stop him. So all of like the scorn troll shit, all of the what we call decency libs on this show, none of that matters. Like, people might wag a finger and people might protest, but unless that protest is actually disruptive, which it won't be, nothing's going to change. These people don't have to listen to you, and they won't. And our Constitution says, if you're the president, all crime is legal. So how can you look at that and say, oh, this is a really stable system that I think is going to last a long time?
I'm surprised that a rich white man is benefiting from a document that was written 200 plus years ago by other rich white men that told them that they can't do crimes. Like, literally, there's no crimes that they can do. Yeah.
I mean, there was an article in The Nation recently that I thought was really useful in the sense that and I'll link to it in the show notes, because I really enjoyed it. One of the points that the author made is that if you look at systems of government established, after the United States, but prior to the modern era, the ones that adopted systems of government similar to the United States, is where you have the bicameral legislature and a powerful executive. They've all become, at some point, they've turned into dictatorships, because instead of the idea that you achieve balance by having these multiple poles kind of competing for influence, all it does is it winds up encouraging political parties to work in the interest of their party and accruing power, more so than any kind of like selling a popular thing or responding to political need. And there's a reason that when the United States set up governments in countries it was occupying post-World War II, in Japan and Germany, they specifically did not use the U.S. model as the government they wanted to establish. They used parliamentary systems. And Britain is a great example of how parliamentary systems can be fucking shit too. But
there's more representation, though. Like, you don't have just the right, you don't have just the Tories and the Labor. You've got other people who can exert some little bit of power. And also,
no, I mean, you don't, because the way that Britain elects people, your vote doesn't matter depending if you live in a constituency where the other party is overwhelmingly going to win. Like, there is no benefit to you voting if you live in like fucking where Rory Stewart used to be the MP in like Cumbria and the border. It doesn't matter if you vote Labour. Labour's never going to win there, and so your vote is effectively wasted. So this creates a situation in which it forces a two-party system. And there's a similar situation to the United States going on here, which is that the Tories have figured out that there are no limits to their power, because norms don't matter and nothing can stop them from doing what they want. Especially now in Britain, where there's no check on power, and so you're going to see similarly stupid things happening here, because their system effectively is winner take all. And although you can have a vote of no confidence to take down a government, the problem is they've weakened the power of Parliament to do that as a sort of concession to the Lib Dems when they went into coalition with the Tories in 2010. And so now it's actually like kind of hard to bring down a government with a vote of no confidence. It's the reason why you could have this staggering zombie government under Theresa May that kept losing votes, but didn't have to resign because they called a vote of no confidence in her. Her party did, and she won it. And so as a result, they couldn't call another one for at least 12 months. So even though she had no mandate, she had no ability to enact any kind of legislation, she could stay prime minister until the law forced them to have an election, which if they hadn't had one in 2019, the next election they would have had to have waited until, effectively they could have waited until 2022 if they'd wanted to. So yes, the UK has some benefit, but I think the entirety of the UK's political system is pretty moribund in its own right. America's just worse.
So sorry that I said that England might be better. I always forget. No, it's not.
There are some ways in which it's better, but there's also ways in which it's worse. And I think, and
a parliamentary system is like that. When we bombed the shit out of Iraq and set up a government there, it was a parliament. It always is a parliament, and it seems like a parliament has a better chance. But yeah, you have the people now who lament that America is so divided, and it's like, man, that's by design. You got to pick a team, and the great thing is that now that the left, the actual left in America, is no longer picking a team, and there's a split. And it's unfortunate because, in the mid-aughts, you remember the Tea Party being formed, the conservatives aren't conservative and crazy enough for us, so we're going to go even crazier, and we're going to drag the party along with us, and if you don't come with us, then you're just going to lose to the Democrats. And the conservatives had no problem with that. They're like, yeah, we'll go be more racist and insane. That's fine. The Democrats are a bit more resistant to that because in essence, the Pete Buttigeg's and the Joe Bidens are Republicans. They're conservatives they're 90s conservatives. They're Reagan conservatives. Recently, Pete Buttigieg did the whole and what about the deficit? And it's like, all right, you need to be thrown into an ocean at this point if you're going to go down the austerity path. So anyway, we've wandered off of our subject quite a bit here. Of basically stop being vet bros and stop inviting vet bros onto Fox and Friends to be absolute shitheads to other veterans, because now it seems like the veteran community is tearing into each other, and there's always been that whole you didn't serve as much as I served, and as a career pogue, I fucking 100% hear that all the time. And here's the thing: I didn't have to fucking live with my dick in the dirt and get shot at a whole bunch. So who's the dumbass here? You get hero points, which don't really count for anything until you get shot 5 times and call in a mortar strike and get a Medal of Honor, and then can go shit talk colonels you've never met on Fox and Friends, which apparently is a career path now in the military. If you're not good enough to get out of the Rangers and go into the SEALs so you can get a book deal, then you just go on Fox and Friends and you shit on other people.
I also think too that there's this idea that being a veteran is above politics. Being a veteran is there's this brotherhood or this there's this fellowship that exists, and people want to use their military experience to back up their opinions. It's what we do all day on this show. I absolutely know that there's no reason why a person can't turn around and say, well, I did 2 deployments and Nate only did 1, so everything he says on Hell of a Way is wrong. And we're not exactly presenting a logical case against that. We just do what we do because we're hoping that it resonates with people who don't agree with, folks like Pete Hegseth and this dipshit that he brought on. And honestly, the veneration of Medal of Honor recipients, makes sense given how we've treated the award in the past. But the idea that you don't use this as this is the ace card for owning the libs is weird, and that seems like a relatively new development.
This is
However,
this is the Yu-Gi-Oh meme of flipping the card, and it's just a
oh
Medal of
yeah, it
Honor.
really is, isn't it? It's like this guy has a Medal of Honor, so basically everything he can tell you that up is left and down is right. It doesn't matter. So, but we want to talk about something really quickly before that we've talked about on the show about procurement, problems and some of the stupidity with the amount of money the military receives versus what that actually translates to in real life. And apparently, thank kudos to Francis for finding this article.
And kudos to Shocks for finding this. Gary Shocks found it and sent it in the Discord, and then I brought it onto the show.
So apparently, MRAPs have the same right to repair restrictions. Military vehicles built by American vehicle manufacturers are not able to be repaired without technicians. So basically, if you've got an MRAP or you've got other vehicles that have this restriction on them, you can't do field expedient repairs. You have to have a person from Oshkosh do it for you. So the same stuff they've done to
John Deere
to make
like the John Deere.
John
tractor.
Deere does it too.
There's a big push for people to buy John Deere tractors built I think in the 70s and the 80s, because parts are easy to either find or machine, and there's not a bunch of proprietary software. I remember, and the John Deere thing has been going on for a while. I remember reading an article where a sensor, this guy has a tractor or a combine or something, and there's a sensor in the seatbelt. So, in your car, it beeps at you. You turn it on the car if your seatbelt's not buckled in. So he's buckled in, but the sensor's not reading it, so it beeps at him. And there's no way for him to fix that other than to call a John Deere technician out and to get in there and replace the sensor. And it's a thing that could take $1,000. Just the repair call itself and just the diagnostics itself can be a couple of $100, and then it's got to be parts got to be ordered. The guy's got to come back out. He's got to put it back in. He's got to fix it. And it's completely unnecessary and useless. And we no longer we have packed so much technology into literally a tractor. It's just supposed to be a thing that's big and that runs on diesel or something, and that drags a thing or pushes a thing. A tractor has multiple uses. It can do many things. You can hook things up to it. They're great. There shouldn't be that much to it. However, for some reason, they've just crammed so much technology in it that if something breaks inside of your tractor, like if a sensor breaks, or an alternator breaks, or a pipe somewhere goes bad, you can't just swap it out yourself. You have to get proprietary hardware, proprietary software. You have to get an actual technician, because if you don't, then you void the warranty. We've managed to fucking do that with our war machines now. An MRAP that you can't replace an alternator on. You drag this thing out to Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or whatever, and in not even it got hit by a mine, just the normal wear and tear of these gigantic vehicles in a desert, austere environment, that things will fail because of whatever, and to be you can't take the MRAP out because the alternator's bad, and we can't replace it because we'll void the warranty, is absolutely insane. This is not only does this horribly affect your ability to get shit done. I mean, it makes you not mission capable. But also, do you even have a contractor out there who can fix it? Do you have to call somebody in from Baghdad? Does that person, how long is it going to take for them to come in? And I always wondered, we in the military, we have slowly been, over decades, been moving away from any sort of self-sufficient, self-sustaining fighting force, where you just pack up everything and you say, everybody just grab your tools and grab your shit, grab the things that you need, get the cooks, get the MKT, the mechanics, grab all of your wrenches and your parts, and we're all going to go, and we can all take care of ourselves out here. Laundry and bath specialist, bring the laundry and bath specialist. We can set up showers, we can set up laundry. It's all done by American soldiers, and the reason why you want to do that is because you should have everybody is self-sufficient. You are a contained unit that can get everything done and make sure that everybody's taken care of, make sure everybody's clothes are clean, make sure all of your vehicles are running. And like now, like my deployments, you always had the local nationals doing your laundry. You had Kellogg, Brown and Root, or local nationals, or people from other countries doing your chow. Unless you are like on a far flung, fob somewhere, then you had like culinary specialists. But like we're slowly moving away from like being able to do anything ourselves and just having to be like, nope, sorry, it's broken. We have to call a contractor who makes like more money than any of us ever would in our entire military career, just come out and slap a new alternator on there, if they even can, or if they'll just come out and be like, yeah, we don't have parts for it, so it's just deadlined forever. Just roll it outside the.
Some of those jobs I was just point out, they make. I remember over 10 years ago that people were describing that the folks that could do, they were licensed or certified to do certain kinds of welds to repair. In our case, it was ASV that had been equipped with some improved ballistic or anti-explosive armor. I can't remember. Those technicians were making easily 300, 400 grand a year. And in combat, they were up to, I think the first $105,000 per year of their income is tax-free. So these are incredibly lucrative jobs. And I remember very clearly, we couldn't get that vehicle back up and running to be, mission capable, just because they just couldn't schedule that guy to come out and do the weld that needed to be done. And I can only imagine how much more complicated it gets when you're talking about like software stuff or certain things to make the engines run. You basically take it out of the purview of Army mechanics or military mechanics. And it's weird to see that happen where the insane, double dip from the trough profit mentality that these, military defense contractor, defense industry corporations have winds up. Like, what is the logical conclusion of this? I mean, we've already made jokes about like the Zumwalt class boats where like the boats break if they get wet. But it's the idea that you're going to see this push towards even more dysfunctional equipment that only exists because it makes a fuckload of money for the people who make it. It just seems kind of absurd. And I hate to say it, but I don't think that's going to go away until the U.S. has a confrontation with a near peer or peer adversary, in which case all of a sudden it's going to become politically impossible for the grift to continue, at least to the same degree. But that also implies a lot of people are going to die, which is fucking horrible.
Or what it means is that like we're slowly privatizing everything until we finally get to the fighting force, and then we're just like, well, I mean, look, we've already got our contractors, out here to fix the showers and to do the food and to do the logistics and to fix your MRAPs and everything. We might as well just go ahead and bring our private guys out to do the actual trigger pulling too. Which is a thing that has been resisted. Like I'm very surprised that Trump resisted Blackwater getting their fucking hands on any war zone, because those people have, they have jets, they have helicopters, they have an entire fighting force. They are ready to be hired out by the U.S. government to go out and do that, in which you make the American soldier obsolete just so that you can like bring in a private fighting force that will have even less oversight, but they can all get their shit done because they brought enough contractors, and we didn't, because for whatever reason we're under budget constraints, but they wouldn't be. They just start drawing pay from the U.S. taxpayer, and everybody gets to make $100,000 a year to go do war crimes. At least that's where I see it going. Either that, or we're all going to die, which also very, very likely. Just don't join the military. As we said, it's shit, man. It's all falling apart. Like even our own, like,
don't do it.
Yeah, even our own fighting force can't fight. Like, what are we even fucking doing anymore? And even the fighting force that we do have, they'll just fucking eat each other until we're just this Ouroboros of shit. This like OCP snake eating its own tail.
You know what kills me is that, like, this is something I've thought about for a while. That, I mean, obviously the sort of hustle and grind politics of people who are like the super entrepreneurs who are always on social media talking about like, you have to work 100-hour weeks or you're a baby and you don't deserve to have, the ability to feed yourself. But in a way, as much as I disagree with that, and as much as I think that breeds a kind of like libertarian, eliminationist, the same kind of Ranger School mentality of if you can't hack it, then you don't deserve to be alive kind of thing. I understand where it's coming from, because you cannot believe any of the promises. Like, nobody. It's genuinely, you cannot trust your employer, you cannot trust your health insurance, you can't trust the police, you can't trust the military, you can't trust your equipment, you can't trust any institution that's supposed to report on these things, you can't trust media, you can't trust basically anything. So the idea that you have to be an island to yourself, and you have to build up any kind of defense reserve you've got to survive in America or in the world under capitalism. I understand, like, they take it to a point where you say, no, you should love capitalism harder. And I absolutely vehemently disagree with that. But I understand where it comes from, because if you're paying attention, you realize how hollow any of these promises are. And each year it just seems to get more absurd, and the response is just this kind of dull thud. And that, I think, is the thing that shocks me the most.
Yeah, I think that the problem is we have a mentality of, when you go to war, or you go to these things and you see that the contractors are making a shitload of money to do not a lot of work. The mentality isn't, this is fucked and we need to change it. We need to get this guy out of here, and we need to have our people doing this, and we need to make sure that we're mission capable. The mentality is, hey man, how can I get a job doing what you do? Because I want to come back over here wearing 511 pants and polo shirts and a Raiders cap, and make fucking $200,000 a year doing like 10% of the work that I'm doing now. And that's a problem. It's that, unfortunate, and not to dive into any more about the bullshit of capitalism, but it's that, stupid individualism that is baked into American culture of, I've got to get mine, I've got to look out for number one, rather than saying this entire system is fucked and we need to tear it down and rebuild it from the ground up. In a way that makes sense, in a way that would be beneficial to not only the people here, but the people back at home. And then you get radicalized and saying, oh, actually, we need to do that with everything. So that's this podcast. If you want the podcast where you yell about lieutenant colonels being called as character witnesses, I don't know. I'm sure there's a podcast for that. It's not us.
Well, on those lines, let's just talk about the bonus content for this week, because I know we actually have a serious interview for once. I spoke with my friend and co-host Hussein Kasvani on the topic of something called Prevent, which is a UK-specific thing that's basically an anti-radicalization program that's become subsumed by policing and the Home Office, the sort of like border enforcement regime. But I think it's instructive, because it's an example of what happens when you basically are when the government is more interested in playing along culture war stuff and treating minority communities as an enemy within, as opposed to the idea of trying to work with people to prevent radicalization and violence. And it's also just a fun conversation, because he's really, really knowledgeable on the topic of how the UK security state apparatus relates to Muslims living in the United Kingdom. So I think you'll enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it. It's available on Patreon. The link will be in the show notes. And I will play a brief snippet of that here, so you can get an idea of what you'll get if you get that episode.
But like, that was a question that came up on BBC Question Time, where you had one of these like audience members that was like, do we need to like be more authoritarian in how we like pursue a counter-extremism program? And I was kind of sitting there thinking, well, our program's like pretty authoritarian as it is, and it's pretty like unaccountable as it is. So like, when we talk about authoritarianism, like, what do we mean? Like, the kind of meaning of authoritarian has changed a lot. And to kind of be in a situation where people are saying that like, oh, we need to be like more aggressive, and we need to be like, less of this needs to come through in courts. And, it's like so we're heading towards like a much more populist approach of what counter-extremism is, which is really, really scary, especially when almost even like the most conservative of counter-extremism think tanks are kind of saying, oh, this like far-right neo-Nazi stuff is becoming a real problem. And what we find is that, at least in the UK, the Prevent system isn't really designed for that. It's not really built for it. So now you have this very expensive, unaccountable infrastructure, but is trying to figure out, well, how do we deal with this like really imminent threat that has been on our shores for a very, very long time, has a much deeper historical resonance, and we have no idea how to track it.
I have this mental image of a really confused Prevent apparatchik trying to figure out who the moderate imams among the skinhead community are.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if a program is wink, wink, nudge, nudge, designed solely to target one group, and you then try to turn around and repurpose it for targeting another extremist group, how much of it do you realize that the entire structure of the institution is based around singling out that one group? And I bring that up too because I recently saw there was a slide that I don't know if it was leaked or it was declassified, but information from the London Met Police about extremist groups. And they consider groups like Extinction Rebellion or Action Against Fascism, basically lots of Antifa groups, lots of protest groups for environmental causes, for anti-police brutality causes, for anti-racist causes, as extremist groups comparable to, anything from like Identity Europa to, full-on, not quite transnational terrorists, but you can see that if they were to broaden it, they're probably not going to broaden it against, the people who beat up Owen Jones, who's a British journalist. He's openly gay. He's very pro-Corbyn and was assaulted back in August, and his attackers were found and convicted. They're not going to go after people like that so much as they're going to go after people who are protesting climate change or people who are protesting police brutality.
Yeah.
And the concern that I have when I look at these things is, obviously, you understand that a government, a state, etc., has a vested interest in trying to curtail violent extremism.
Yeah.
But it just seems like it's slowly. It's weird how the panopticon has a huge blind spot for right-wing extremism, and that seems to be this constant refrain. We have the same problem in the United States. I mean, the Boston police, there's like a police department, maybe it was Boston police or somewhere in Massachusetts, we're talking about how they're tracking, violent extremism in Massachusetts, and all of the tabs they had open in their browser screenshot they shared were all like tracking Antifa groups or like environmental protest groups. Like, that's the shit they care about. Like, if Black Lives Matter has a protest, they think that's basically the second coming of the Nazis. If the actual second coming of the Nazis has a protest, they're like, well, they have different opinions and you have to respect that. And it's
what happens?
Shocking.
Yeah, I mean, what happens when like those right-wing groups are part of like the kind of right-wing populist infrastructure, right? What happens when...
It's weird how the Gatestone Institute is not that dissimilar in terms of its rhetoric to Anjem Chowdhury,
right?
But one is so respected that people aren't really ashamed of being affiliated or even members of the board, whereas the other, like... You now have the government showing it has the willingness to cancel people's citizenship over affiliation with a group.
Yeah. And again, I mean, that's all like, this is all speculation too, but I kind of go back to like, I think about this in terms of that government surveillance of activist organizations, especially like anti-government activist organization, has been like a historic thing. They did it with like they did it to like Irish activist groups. Spy Cops is like still a case that's ongoing.
Can we talk about Spy Cops a little bit? Because that's a thing that hasn't been talked about as much in U.S. media.
Yeah.
But effectively, there were undercover police that were infiltrating activist groups to the point where they were so deep cover, they literally like fathered children with some activists. And it turned out these people were basically saboteurs from the state who had been there being paid police salary the entire time. At least that's my understanding of it.
Yes. Yeah. And like there's like a very good book called Spy Cops by I think a guy called Paul Lewis. I think his name is Paul Lewis, but correct me if I'm wrong. And it kind of like, and the thing is like those cases are still going on, right? Like there are Spy Cops hearings that happen at least like once a month, and there are still like secretive, and like a lot of those cases are still like secretive, and there's still like women who are trying to kind of bring their cases to court, and Scotland Yard isn't cooperating with them, or they're just saying that we've lost all this paperwork, so we can't really do anything. I'm sorry, even though like bit sus.
Damn, destroying evidence. It's famously never happened in the British Empire.
So there's also like a great deal of like stakes, and in terms of and what like police interests are, and what like our government's like more interested in kind of taking on anti-government associations. And are they kind of more reluctant to take on organizations that aren't necessarily anti-government?
But are antisocial in some capacity.
But yeah,
and that's the thing I think is sort of the limit of liberal ideology, is that the liberal is incredibly shocked and mystified by the idea that they would prosecute one but not the other, whereas I feel like the leftist viewpoint on this is that it's very obvious that right-wing militias and fascists and stuff are agents of state power, in a way, of right-wing state power.
Yeah.
And why would they kneecap their own auxiliaries?
Yeah. But to say that, yeah.
You say that and you sound like a conspiracy theorist, and yet it keeps happening over and over again.
Yeah, weird that.
So let's talk, if we can, for a second about the whole Anjem Chowdhury thing, because that is brought up so much, but it feels to me as an outsider like that was at one point relevant and now no longer is relevant. But in the minds of the people who want more prevent all the time, it still is relevant.
I met him once. It's really weird. Because like I used to go to the East London Mosque sometimes with my friends, and because him and his mates were always in Whitechapel. And they used to go to the cafe actually not that far away. It's like the one near Taib's. It's like literally like a minute walk from our office.
That's crazy.
And they used to go to this cafe because the cafe would do these very sugary cappuccinos. And he was like a real sugar addict. I found that incredibly funny about him, that he was just like addicted to sugar. Anyway, he was a big deal because he was a shock jock. He knew exactly how to, this is a guy who used to be a lawyer. He wasn't like a very good lawyer. But he was like well known among kind of like the community in East London because they used to do a lot of work here and everything. And I guess he became like one of the kind of first reactionaries, right? He became someone who preached like social conservatism. He went and like tried to provoke people, and it came at the right time because like the English Defence League and stuff came out and they were trying to provoke people, and all these other right-wing groups were trying to provoke people. And like for them, it was just like, fun weekends out, like fighting and everything. It was like a very British thing in some ways. But I think
on my way to the pub to go glass someone in the face on normal Friday afternoon.
I mean, that's like what we do at like the pub in Watney Market. But I guess like, he also like had the aesthetic down to the T as well, right? Like he had the beard, he had like the hat, he had the long Muslim clothes and everything. But this is like a guy who can speak very good English, someone who has like an English accent. So there's like that sense of familiarity. And he goes on live TV and him and his followers like go and burn poppies, right? It's like,
the poppy being the big symbol of like veterans' remembrance. It would be like, imagine if a very, very hardline Muslim preacher in some capacity in America was like, we're burning yellow ribbons, bitch. This is just what's going to happen.
He knew how to provoke and get television to come to him. And, he was always open for interviews as well. Like, again, when I speak about him, I'm like, this was the reactionary playbook. And when we think about like the reactionaries that we know now, and how they've gained like a lot of prominence, they played the Anjem Chowdhury playbook really well. But he also, and I guess he also represented like this time of weird anxiety towards like in the Gordon Brown years, when, we're kind of, the crash has just happened. There's a lot of kind of anxiety. 7/7 is still like a fresh memory. There's still like a lot of mistrust in Muslim communities like mistrusting the government. The Iraq war is failing. Hundreds of British bodies are coming back and they're like dead, and everyone's kind of like, this war was for nothing. So there's like a lot of anti-government stuff as well. Like it was kind of this hodgepodge of just like real anxiety, and he kind of comes in at this moment as like a representation of all the fears that like white people in the home counties think like London represents. And in many ways he played that role, and he knew that he was playing that role. So it almost felt like theater to a degree, but he was definitely used as like justification for like, we need to beef up our counter extremism measures. We need to kind of beef up our, what do you call it? We have to like beef up our kind of surveillance measures as well. And that's where like lots of surveillance came in. Because they kind of felt, well, if a guy called Anjem Chowdhury can get this huge following, like where are the other ones and who are his followers and stuff like that. And that kind of developed all the way up to, like ISIS. And it wasn't that he was arrested that kind of waned his influence. It was the fact that like he just stopped being relevant at that point.
I was going to say, I mean, like if the most hardline thing is what he's preaching, then great. But when there's people in Iraq and Syria going full bore insane, obviously you pale by comparison. You just seem like it's sort of Nigel Farage to the EDL kind of comparison, or something even more hardline. If the EDL formed a breakaway state in Dagenham and Raynham, then like Nigel Farage wouldn't seem as insane by comparison.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here with us. If you want bonus content like that, we have a lot of bonus stuff at the $1, the $3, the $5, and the $10 levels on our Patreon, patreon.com/hellofawayti. All kinds of great stuff on there. So please check it out. We've got everything from serious interviews, funny interviews, dad chats, movie reviews. We've got another movie review coming up with me, Nate, and Nate's wife, Cynthia, of the 2002 Christian Bale Equilibrium. So that should look for that coming out pretty soon. As always, you can follow me at Army Strang, follow Nate at In These Deserts, follow the podcast at Hell of a Way. Get us on YouTube. You can get us on your SoundCloud. You can get us wherever podcasts are. We are there, and we promise we will always be there. So please, as always, just whatever support you can give us, whether it's financial, whether it's spiritual, whether it's just coming and giving us a pat on the back, wherever you might be, we do appreciate it. So thank you, and Nate, we'll talk to you next week.